Hello friends and welcome to the Virtual Learning Network. This is session 7 for Modern India 1857 to 1964 and here we will discuss popular uprisings, second half of the 19th century. The topics to be covered are Introduction, Colonial Impact, Peasants, Tribals and Artisans, Popular Movements up to 1857, Popular Movements after 1857, Characteristics of Movements, Working Class Movements. First is Introduction. The English were able to suppress the uprising of 1857, but this could not end the feelings of bitterness towards their rule, particularly amongst the peasants and tribals who had to reckon with the oppressive character of the regime in its severest form. So, जो इंग्लिश पीपल थे, इंग्लिश मैन ने 1857 की अपराइजिंग को तो सप्रेस कर दिया था, लेकिन इस वजह से जो लोगों के अंदर फीलिंग्स और ग्रज आ गया था वो रिमूव नहीं हो पाया और इस वजह से 19th सेंचुरी में भी बहुत सारी अपराइजिंग्स हुई. दे वर एक्सप्लॉइटेड बाय बोथ द कॉलोनियल गवर्नमेंट एंड द लैंडलॉर्ड्स बिकॉज द लेटर वर now looked upon by the government as natural leaders of the people. Next is the colonial impact. As for agriculture, the land settlements, that is permanent, Raitwari and Mehelwadi, created certain new elements like a market economy and did away with some customary rights like forest and pasturage rights. Secondly, social differentiation was not a feature, but colonialism accentuated the differences and created a sharper polarization between those who owned lands, had acquired wealth. Another major aspect of colonial policy was to forcibly commercialize agriculture with the obvious idea of providing raw material for British industries. And as for the artisans, colonialism spelled doom for them. So एग्रीकल्चर के लिए जो लैंड सेटलमेंट्स थी वो भी बिल्कुल न्यू इकोनॉमी थी और उस वजह से उन्हें प्रॉब्लम्स आ रही थी जिसमें कस्टमरी राइट्स नहीं थे. फिर सोशल डिफ्रेंसिएशन भी बहुत ज़्यादा आ गया था, डिस्क्रिमिनेशन भी होती थी और दूसरा कॉलोनियल पॉलिसी का एस्पेक्ट था कि कमर्शलाइज करने की कोशिश की जा रही थी एग्रीकल्चर को, जो कि एक रॉ मटेरियल प्रोवाइड करने का आइडिया था बेसिक ब्रिटिश इंडस्ट्रीज़ को. और आर्टिजन्स के लिए भी कॉलोनियलिज्म बिल्कुल मैचअप नहीं हो रहा था. देन नेक्स्ट इज peasants, tribals and artisans. When one talks of peasants, one is referring to all those people who directly participate in agricultural production. Some of these were poor and some others were comparatively more affluent. As for the tribals, there were different tribal groups like Khons, Savras, Santals, Mundas, Koyas, Kols, etc. The artisans were those people who were engaged in the manufacture of traditional handicraft like cotton products, salt, iron goods, etc. सो पीजेंट्स जो थे वो तो डायरेक्टली जो एग्रीकल्चर में इन्वॉल्व होते हैं वो होते हैं. ट्राइबल्स के लिए भी अलग अलग ग्रुप्स थे जैसे कि खॉन्स, संथाल्स एक्सेट्रा. और आर्टिजन्स वो लोग थे जो हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स में एंगेज्ड होते हैं, हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स मैन्युफैक्चर करते हैं. नाउ द पॉपुलर मूवमेंट्स अप टू 1857. तो इसमें जो पॉपुलर मूवमेंट्स थी 1857 तक वो थी उड़ीसा की, देन संथाल रिबेलियन और फिर 1857 अपराइजिंग. नाउ इन द अर्ली 1850s वी कम अक्रॉस सम ट्राइबल मूवमेंट्स इन उड़ीसा. देयर वर पॉपुलर मूवमेंट्स अमंग द खॉन्स ऑफ घुमसार एंड बौड एंड द सवराज ऑफ पार्लिया खेमडी. These popular movements were attributed to Chakra Bisoi, who since 1837 had resisted all attempts to arrest him. The specific problem among the Khons centered around the determination of the colonial administration to stop the human sacrifices associated with the media sacrifice. What is worth noting is that the new pressures and uncertainties forced the Khons to appease their gods for good harvest of turmeric, but the colonial administration tried to stop this practice. Then next is the Santhal rebellion. Yet another major rebellion tribal rebellion was among the Santals in 1855 to 57 of Birbhum, Bankura, Singhbhum, Hazaribagh, Bhagalpur, and Monghir. The colonial character of the regime contributed to the precipitation of this conflict. दोबारा से संथाल रेबेलियन के लिए भी colonial policy ही जिम्मेदार थी. We get references to some merchants and money lenders from northern and eastern India completely controlling the existence of Santals through interest on loans with rates ranging from 50% to 500%. These exploitative people used two types of measures, a big one that is Baraban to receive things and small measure Chota Ban to give things to the Santals. They also grabbed लैंड्स ऑफ दी संथाल्स. तो संथाल रेबेलियन के लिए भी कॉलोनियल पॉलिसी ही जिम्मेदार थी. इसमें क्या था, जो उनको लोन दिया जाता था वो बहुत ज़्यादा पैसों पे दिया जाता था, जैसे कि 50% या 500% इंटरेस्ट उनको पे करना पड़ता था, और इस वजह से ही संथाल अपराइजिंग हुई. नेक्स्ट इज 1857. सम स्कॉलर्स लाइक एरिक स्टोक्स point out how the rural elite whose interest had been threatened by colonialism led the peasants and artisans who followed them tamely. Others like S.B. Chaudhary and Rudranshu Mukherjee feel that although landed elements provided the leadership, there were some expectations, and more importantly, the strength of the rebellion was based on the participation of the peasants, including the sepoys who were after all peasants in uniform. Then, the common resentment against the operation of the moneylender united the peasants and the artisans. तो जो कॉमन रिसेंटमेंट थी, यानी कि कॉमन प्रॉब्लम जो थी मनी लेंडर्स के वजह से, वो थी पीजेंट्स और आर्टिजन्स के बीच में, और जिसकी वजह से ये 1857 में अपराइजिंग स्टार्ट हुई थी. ब्रिटिश रूल वॉज आइडेंटिफाइड एज बनिया का राज, एंड द रिबेलियन marked an opposition to the moneylenders as well as the British. Along with this was the erosion of customary rights and privileges of the peasants. Next is the popular movements after 1857. In this we have Indigo riots, Mopla uprising, Pabna, Deccan riots, Koya rebellion, and Birsa Munda revolt. First is the Indigo riots. Indigo plantation had been set up as early as 1770 by the East India Company. The planters relied on physical coercion and legal manipulation to force the peasants to grow indigo at a loss. And this created a lot of discontent since the peasants could not grow food grains which they needed for survival. By 1859, thousands of peasants had withdrawn their labor, formed organizations all over the indigo plantation districts, and resisted the repression of the planters and their armed retainers. तो इंडिगो राइट्स था. इंडिगो की वजह से उन्हें बहुत ज़्यादा परेशानी होती थी. उन्हें वो ग्रो करने नहीं दिए जाते थे क्रॉप्स जिनकी उन्हें ज़रूरत है खाने पीने के लिए, और इंडिगो में उन्हें बहुत ज़्यादा नुकसान होते थे. और इस वजह से 1859 में बहुत सारे हज़ारों पीजेंट्स ने एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन फॉर्म की, जहाँ पे वो इंडिगो प्लांटेशन डिस्ट्रिक्ट में जहाँ इंडिगो प्लांट होता था, और इंडिगो प्लांटेशन को हटा दिया. देन नेक्स्ट इज द मोपला अपराइजिंग. In the 1850 to 1900 period, we also witnessed a series of Mopla uprisings in Malabar. As the Genmi landlords, backed by the police, law courts and revenue officials tightened their grip over the Mopla peasants, the latter rebelled against the landlords and the British. It is not surprising to see how what was essentially a rich-poor conflict between the Genmi landlord and the Mopla peasants was given distinct communal coloring by the colonial state, since the landlords were Hindu and the peasants were Muslim. Next is the Pabna. Another important movement was the Pabna in Bengal peasants movement of 1873 to 1885. The peasants of Pabna did not object to rent hikes, and in fact, between 1858 and 1873, they met the rent demands of their landlords without any resistance. At the root of the movement was the tendency of the zamindars to annihilate the tenants' newly acquired occupancy right. Occupancy tenants were being converted into tenants at will through forcible written agreements. So this was the case in the Pabna. Next is the Deccan Rights. The decline of the collective system of tax collection implied that, unlike in the earlier days, the moneylender was not subject to executive and judicial authority of the village. The courts under new laws polarized the caste differences between the Vanis and Kunbis by favoring the former. This implied an increase in the transfer of holding from peasants to moneylenders. Then Koya rebellion, the movement reflected the problems faced by the tribals like the erosion of customary rights over forest, the exploitation of money by moneylenders who began to control the life of the Koyas through loans and land transfer. Then Birsa Munda movement or Birsa Munda revolt, the last popular revolt was between 1874 and 1901 and was led by Birsa Munda from about 1895. A tribal movement, it affected an area of about 400 square miles in the Chota Nagpur region of South Bihar. Born out of the basic problem affecting the tribals in the colonial period, erosion of customary rights from forced labor, colonial laws, etc., it had a distinct connection with Christianity in the early phase. So basically जितनी भी पॉपुलर मूवमेंट थी वो मनी लेंडर्स की वजह से ही आई थी जो लोन्स पे वो इंटरेस्ट चार्ज कर रहे थे. Next is the characteristics of movements. Now the movement had certain characteristics. First, inherent in most of them was the attempt to look back into the past when life was much better. तो वो हमेशा पास्ट से कंपेयर करते थे प्रेजेंट को जब उनकी लाइफ बहुत ज़्यादा सेटिस्फाइड थी. Then, on occasions, the people learned through their experience to identify anti-imperialism as a necessary component of their struggle like the Mundas. The movement reflected a popular peasant utopia and in many cases was associated with the hopes of their dawning of new age as well as the emergence of messiahs. Another noticeable feature was the association of these popular movements with religion and caste. Then, another important facet of these popular movements was their close association with lootings and crimes directed against the affluent classes. Then, the sense of solidarity exhibited by peasants, tribals, and artisans is another characteristic feature. And finally, these popular movements served to considerably narrow the gap between a section of Indian intelligentsia and the popular masses. Next is the working class movement. Now, after discussing the popular movement among peasants, tribals and artisans, we now take up the role of industrial workers between 1850 and 1900. So, artisans, peasants और जो हमारी मेन हैंडीक्राफ्ट मैन थे उनके अलावा ट्राइबल्स थे जैसे उनकी मूवमेंट के अलावा वर्किंग क्लास या लेबर क्लास जो थे उन्होंने भी एक अपराइजिंग शुरू की थी, रिवोल्ट शुरू किया था. फर्स्ट इज एफर्ट्स ऑफ द एजुकेटेड जेंट्री. नाउ इन दिस फेज वी कम अक्रॉस सेक्शंस ऑफ द एजुकेटेड जेंट्री coming forward to focus on the problems of the workers. In 1870, Sasipada Banerjee, a Brahmo Samajist, founded the Working Men's Club and published a journal from Baranagar near Calcutta in 1874. The Calcutta Brahmo Samaj founded in 1878 the Working Men's Mission to propagate religious morality, etc. among the workers. Then strikes. Whereas these efforts sought to organize the workers, this phase was marked by spontaneous workers' movement. We get references to a strike by the river transporters of Bengal in 1853, a coachman's strike in Calcutta in 1862, etc. The first big strike occurred in 1862 when about 1200 labourers of Howrah railway station went on a strike demanding an 8 hours working day. What is worth noting is that this action preceded the history May Day movement of the Chicago workers by about 24 years, and the strike occurred in a section which had begun from 1853. Now next are the characteristics of these movement. While surveying these popular struggles, a few points should be mentioned. They serve to narrow the gap between the workers and the intelligentsia. In many cases, the workers were led by jobbers, sirdars, who recruited them and who normally belonged to the same region and caste of the workers. Now here are some questions for you. First, discuss the basic characteristics of the popular movement during this period. And second, discuss the emergence of the working class in India. That's all for this session. Thank you and have a nice day.